Liz can talk yet. So Chris.
Hi, Chris Havel, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Excellent. All right, Liz, are you good yet? No. Okay. All right, then I'm gonna carry us on. And are there any changes to the agenda? I'm aware of one. I think we took off item number I. Is that correct? Chris, Denise? Sorry, you guys, I
Yes.
was out at a funeral all morning
Yes,
and
that's
afternoon,
right.
so still okay. So that with that change, can you guys call a motion to approve the agenda? Help me out,
I move to
Commissioner.
approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have an approved agenda. All right, Liz, that work?
Can you hear me now?
Yay!
Completely different computer, so we're good. Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm glad you had another computer.
All right, so we just approved the agenda, is that right?
You did, yep. If you
All
want to
right.
intro yourself.
Yeah, yes, I will. I'm Liz Hill, Commissioner from Congressional District 2, and the chair of the commission. So thank you guys for bearing with me. I'm sorry about that. And thank you all for being here to get some of these special pieces done on time-sensitive contracts and other sorts of things. So it looks like, am I right? We're on 1C, the SCORP.
That's it. Yep, we're ready to go into SCORP.
So we'll go ahead and move on to the exciting SCORP this year. So I'm looking forward to hearing about this.
It's all yours, Caleb.
All right, just sharing the screen. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hill, Director Sumpton, and members of the commission. As mentioned, I'm Caleb Dixon, research analyst here at OPRD, and I'm here to present on action item 1C on the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan approval. So the plan has a number of components that we're going to go over today. The first is public engagement and surveys. Then we're going to talk about some findings from those surveys related to outdoor recreation participation needs and benefits in the state of Oregon. Then we're going to talk about some statewide issues identified in the plan. And our last topic is going to be on the Land and Water Conservation Fund open project selection process, which is kind of where we take everything we've learned in SCORP and incorporate it into the grant criteria for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we'll end by talking about the next steps in the SCORP process. Now, the SCORP team, this is not all inclusive, but this is kind of the key members. So and some of these folks will be speaking today as well. So from OPRD, you have myself, Brady Callahan, our geospatial lead. He'll be speaking a little bit today. And then key members who won't be necessarily speaking today, but who've been very important in the process are Naomi Enciso, our Land and Water Conservation Fund Grant Program Coordinator, and Chris Havel, who I think you all know well. And as you may have caught on with our introductions, there's a number of folks from Oregon State University who've helped on this plan, as we have contracted a large part of the research with Oregon State University Center for the Outdoor Recreation Economy. And so we have Randy Rosenberger, a professor, Lydia Garrell, faculty research assistant, and Dakota Nelson, administrative and operations coordinator, joining us today. Now, before we get into the details, I want to give you just a little background on the SCORP, why we do it, and what are the requirements of the plan. And so we do refer to it as SCORP because statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan is a bit of a mouthful. So we refer to it as SCORP for short. And the requirements of the plan are outlined by the National Park Service. And those requirements are, first, the plan needs to identify important statewide outdoor recreation issues. Next, the plan needs to evaluate both the supply side and demand side of outdoor recreation in the state. From the supply side, we're really referring to outdoor recreation resources and facilities. From the demand side, we're looking at public outdoor recreation preferences and participation. And the plan needs to be put together with ample and widespread opportunity for public involvement and needs to be updated every 5 years. So hopefully today, throughout our presentation, we'll demonstrate how we've satisfied each of these requirements. Now, the main purpose of the plan is that it qualifies Oregon to participate in the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund program. And particularly, the SCORP guides the program by helping to identify high priority needs in the state and then incorporating those needs into the grant criteria. And this grant program awards up to $4 million annually to qualified projects in Oregon. So this is federal monies that come to projects in Oregon. Now, beyond the Land and Water Conservation Fund function, the SCORP is also really useful for other OPRD administered grant programs. For example, the local government grant program. And the opportunity to put together this type of research makes the SCORP a great resource for any outdoor recreation planning efforts in the state of Oregon, whether they're at federal, state, or local units of government. And it's also a great resource for folks working in the private sector as well. And one key aspect of the plan is that we're looking at outdoor recreation needs and issues across all jurisdictions in Oregon. So even though our agency is tasked with putting it together, we're not looking at planning efforts exclusively for Oregon State Parks, although Oregon State Parks is involved. We're looking at anything from your local park down the street with playgrounds for kids out to, a dispersed federal lands as well. Now, the plan that we have been putting together for the last couple of years is titled Balance and Engagement, Sustaining the Benefits for All Oregonians. And this title is really meant to capture the main themes of the plan. The first is that outdoor recreation provides a lot of benefits to Oregonians, and it's very important to Oregonians. But we have found that not all Oregonians engage with outdoor recreation equally. And so that's where the engagement piece comes into this title. And we've also found that as more and more people are getting outside, there's natural resource issues, risks, crowding issues. And so we want to have a balanced and sustained approach so that those benefits can exist in the long term. And in particular, what we look at in the SCORP is outdoor recreation participation, needs and benefits in Oregon, and some more pressing statewide outdoor recreation issues. Now, I mentioned that public involvement is one of the requirements for SCORP. And so we have a number of avenues in which we've engaged with the public during this planning process. So the first is a representative statewide survey of over 3,000 Oregon residents. This is kind of that demand side that I talked about at the beginning. Then turning to the supply side, we also surveyed 178 Oregon outdoor recreation providers. And in the next couple of slides, you'll learn a little bit more about those surveys. Now, throughout the planning process, we've been guided and received feedback from about 30 outdoor recreation professionals on our advisory committee, and they represent different interest and stakeholder groups from across the outdoor recreation industry in the state of Oregon. This past winter, we held 3 public open house events where we presented kind of a brief synopsis of the plan and gave folks who were in attendance an opportunity to provide comments. And then just last month, in June, we had all of the materials of the plan open for public review and public comment. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Lydia Gorell from Oregon State University to talk a bit about the surveys and some of the findings.
Thanks, Caleb. Could you go to the next slide? Is everyone able to hear me okay? Great, thank you. All right, so like Caleb mentioned, this data for the SCORP was gathered through 2 different survey efforts. The first was the 2022 Oregon Resident Outdoor Recreation Survey. This was a representative survey of Oregonians that combined 2 different samples. The first was a random statewide sample of Oregon residents who had their addresses on file with the Oregon DMV, either for a license or for an ID card. This sample was combined with a panel sample that was gathered through Qualtrics that was intended to oversample for certain demographics that we correctly assumed would be underrepresented in the random statewide sample. Combined and weighted, so we weighted for 4 different demographic characteristics according to census proportions. So that was gender, age, ethnicity, so whether the respondent was Hispanic or Latino or not, and by community type, so whether the individual was from an urban or suburban community versus a rural community. Altogether, combined and weighted, we ended up with 3,071 responses. And the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Resident Survey focused on outdoor recreation participation and looked at it for 76 different activities, with some differences for activities that happened inside a community versus outside a community. There were also questions on outdoor recreation needs and priorities, as well as constraints to outdoor recreation that were particularly salient for that respondent, and opinions on different parks and recreation management strategies. Next slide. Thanks. All right, and then the other survey that we did was the Oregon Park and Recreation Provider Survey, for which we received 178 responses from outdoor recreation providers throughout the state from all types of jurisdictions, local, tribal, state, federal governments. If it was a public agency, they were on the email blast. We differentiated a little bit between whether the agency or the organization existed within an urban growth boundary or outside of one. The surveys were largely identical regardless of whether they were inside or outside of that boundary, but there were some slight differences in some of the questions about outdoor recreation services, which I will just kind of show in a later slide. And these providers were, in addition to talking about the different services they provided, were able to identify different funding priorities and management challenges for their particular organization. Next slide. Thanks. All right. I'm going to pivot to talking a little bit about outdoor recreation participation data here. And you can just go to the next slide, Caleb. There, like I said, were 76 different activities that we asked about. The most common activities that anyone said they participated in were those that occurred within the boundaries of a community. It's not particularly surprising because they require less travel and typically less expensive. The most common specific activities we saw were walking or hiking or other trail-based activities, but we also saw a lot of interest in biking, general nature study and observation, and outdoor leisure. Next slide. The top activities inside a community, like I said, walking or hiking was the most popular. We extrapolated 358 million occasions of this happening in Oregon during 2022, with 80% of the population participating in this at least once. We also saw other activities were really popular, like spending time in or observing nature, going to parks or playgrounds with kiddos, attending outdoor events like fairs or festivals, going to dog parks, biking, picnicking, or doing art outdoors like drawing or photography. Next slide. So the top activities outside a community, you'll see that we are dropping our most popular activity by like a 10th. So like I said, these are a lot less frequently happening, but walking or hiking is still the most popular with 34 million occasions and 53% participating. Also saw spending time in and observing nature was still very popular outside communities, as well as visiting ocean or freshwater beaches, sightseeing while driving, taking kids to natural settings, taking dogs hiking off leash, car or RV camping, visiting historical sites, nature centers, fairs or festivals, and going on picnics. Next slide. By looking at the different participation data, we were able to identify a few demographics that were at risk of being underserved within the outdoor recreation sector. This included racial and ethnic minorities like Asian, Black and African American, mixed race, and Hispanic, Latino, and Latina residents of Oregon. I do want to mention these aren't, this isn't an exhaustive list of racial and ethnic minorities that might be underserved. These are just the ones that we got good data on. We also saw this risk for residents of Oregon with a disability or in a household with someone with a disability, as well as Oregon residents earning less than $25,000 a year, those who were 60 years or older, and those who lived in rural settings. Next slide. All right, this last section I'm going to talk about is outdoor recreation needs that were identified both by residents of Oregon as well as by outdoor recreation providers. Next slide. So the purposes of this assessment is to recognize the different outdoor recreation needs for the state of Oregon and particularly focus on local jurisdictions as well as specific underserved communities in the state. As it's also important, as this is a grant program, to identify priority projects for the distribution of land and water conservation funds. And especially when identifying those projects, to give a lot of weight to the input from residents of Oregon and the people who are contributing to the agencies that provide these services. Next slide. So the top outdoor recreation needs of Oregon residents, these are divided by whether this was within a close to home setting or a dispersed area setting. We defined close to home as those happening inside a community and dispersed area as those happening outside of the community. We did establish that definition, but you'll see they're largely similar across the board. Clean and well-maintained facilities, restrooms, and free of charge recreation opportunities were the top 3 priorities of Oregon residents, regardless of whether the setting was close to home or in a dispersed area. Parks and recreation areas were also 4th most important and in close to home areas and 5th most important in dispersed areas. While in close to home, they had a unique need highlighted for directional signs and details about trails at trailheads. While in dispersed areas, they stated that nature and wildlife viewing areas were 4th most important. Next slide. All right, and then kind of to compare, these are the top outdoor recreation needs that were identified by Oregon recreation providers. Again, you'll see a distinction between those happening close to home versus dispersed areas. But the definition's a little different, with close to home priorities being those that were identified by providers whose agencies were within an urban growth boundary, and dispersed area priorities were identified by agencies outside an urban growth boundary. You'll still see a lot of similarity, just a little more shuffling. Lighting and or security cameras in key areas was most important for close to home providers, 4th most important for dispersed area providers. Restrooms was 2nd most important in close to home areas, 3rd most important in dispersed areas. Community trail systems is 3rd most important for close to home areas, and I'll point to number 5 in dispersed area priorities, which is connecting trails into larger trail systems. These are pretty much the same question. They were just asked a little bit differently because the surveys differed slightly depending on where that agency was. Accessibility and opportunities for people with disabilities was 4th most important in close to home areas and 2nd in dispersed areas. And then law enforcement officers was 5th most important in close to home areas and 1st most important in dispersed areas. So that's what I have, and I'm gonna pass to Randy.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting us to come provide some information about this work. We're going to talk about the benefits side of SCORP. This kind of started with the last SCORP, and our motivation for coming up with some of these benefit estimates was to move out of the space of leisure and nice to have when it comes to outdoor recreation and move it into a necessary must have. And so these were to help improve the ability to seek funding, to express arguments, to look at returns on investments for outdoor recreation, parks and recreation investments. So next slide. So we came up with 2 different metrics. One you could argue is embedded in the other, but let's start with the cost of illness. So this is really kind of a health benefits estimate. And what we looked at here was that it's a well-known relationship between the level of physical activity and reductions in risk factors associated with 8 chronic illnesses. So we took that information, converted the participation data. So this is for residents of Oregon. These are for people. And we took that measure of physical activity and converted that into a money metric that is based on the overall medical costs for treating and caring for 8 chronic illnesses. So we estimate this to be about $2.965 billion per year savings associated with Oregonians participating in outdoor recreation. That's about 10% of the overall healthcare costs in the state in a given year. Next metric. This next metric is to really look at, what is the value that people have? So we've got all these people that participate, but how does that generate into their quality of life or their value? And one way to think about this, we're looking at net economic value, but let's step back and talk about total value first. Total value is the amount of worth that somebody places on an outdoor recreation experience. It includes what they have to pay to participate, which Caleb will show how that fits into community impacts on the next slide. But then if the cost of participating is less than what their expressed value is, then they create this savings. And we call that consumer surplus. So here we are only measuring what value outdoor recreation participation is to Oregonians above and beyond what they actually spend to participate. What this means is that if outdoor recreation opportunities were to disappear tomorrow from the state of Oregon, there would be about a $57.1 billion loss in consumer welfare. So this is not a small impact. And as what you'll see, as it should be, this value is magnitudes above and beyond what people actually spend. Caleb, you're next.
Thanks, Randy. As Randy mentioned, we also did, though, look at what happens in terms of the spending that people, the dollars that actually come out of people's wallets as they spend at businesses throughout the state while going on outdoor recreation trips. And this is really looking, so as Randy was mentioning, looking at participants' value. Here, we're really looking at how does the actual Oregon economy benefit from this participation. And we contracted with a group called Earth Economics, who was also contracted a few years back. And we actually updating a report done by Earth Economics that was commissioned by the Oregon Office of Outdoor Recreation, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Travel Oregon. And we were able to update it with the new survey results for this round of SCORP. And the high-level findings are that first, outdoor recreation spending supported about $16 billion in spending at Oregon businesses, which is about 4% of the state GDP. And that also translated into some very positive employment effects, as outdoor recreation supported 192,000 jobs and $8.2 billion in wages, about 7.3% of state employment. And a big part of this, these different benefit analyses is really illustrating, just kind of how important outdoor recreation is, the benefits, and why the provision of outdoor recreation services is so important for the people who participate, as Randy mentioned, and then also for just generally people in the state and businesses that serve and support outdoor recreation. And that kind of leads us into our statewide issues. And so we have three major statewide issues. And the first two are really related to kind of ensuring that those benefits are accessible to all within the state. And also that as more and more people get outside and there's some possible negative effects of outdoor recreation, that we make sure that we are able to sustain those benefits. So those are captured in our first two statewide issues of engaging with underserved communities and balancing conservation and recreation. And then our third statewide issue is a bit more of a technical issue, which is related to a recreation data standard for geospatial information. So looking at our topic of engaging with underserved communities. So this is very similar to previous SCORPs, where we've looked at groups that are underserved according to the survey data. And so once again, SCORP participation data indicated a number of groups were participating less often than the statewide average. And particularly this report focuses on low-income Oregon residents, residents in a household with a disability, and racially and ethnically diverse residents. And the metrics that illustrate this, lower participation are that we see differences relative to the statewide population in participation rates for specific activities and total participation across all activities. So just all the times you get outdoors doing different activities. But we also saw differences in the constraints to participation that these groups faced compared to the general population. And so the hypothesis that we have is that if we want to improve equitable access, if we want to shrink these participation gaps, we should focus on minimizing the constraints that are particularly prominent and unique to underserved communities. And so those constraints for these groups tend to fall into three different categories: social constraints, economic constraints, and accessibility constraints. And I do want to stress here, these constraints that we've identified come directly from the survey responses of individuals who have identified in these different communities. And so the first grouping of social constraints includes things like feeling a lack of personal security, there being a lack of group activities or cultural events, feeling of discrimination, having a lack of experience, and having language barriers. The next category are economic related constraints, things like trips to visit natural areas being expensive, difficulty with transportation, and folks not having the gear or equipment required for specific activities. And the last category are accessibility related constraints. So personal health issues, not knowing where accessible features are located within outdoor areas, and then also just a general lack of accessible features in outdoor areas. And so the report on this issue focuses on how can we address, is particularly how can land managers and outdoor recreation providers address these specific unique and prominent constraints that are impacting these communities to shrink those participation gaps. And so some example recommendations are providing more free of charge recreation opportunities, providing opportunities specifically for people with disabilities, having more community programming where folks can maybe learn about new outdoor activities, and also just kind of have the welcoming feeling of being in a community. Having improved communication and information availability. So this is related to things like having detailed information about the accessibility of an area so that people can identify which areas are suitable for their needs. And then as new buildings, new features are being put together, designing with universal design principles to increase the overall inventory of accessible features. And really the goal here is to shrink those participation gaps so that we can ensure all Oregonians are enjoying the benefits of outdoor recreation. Our next topic is titled Balancing Outdoor Recreation and Conservation. And this is really motivated by a few things happening right now. The first is, I think most people who are on this call are probably familiar with the fact that visits to outdoors in Oregon are reaching new heights in recent years. We've seen records at state parks, we've seen them in federal lands as well. And in general, this is a good thing, right? We just talked about all the benefits of outdoor recreation, but there are some risks. And I think we've heard about those risks. And it's really this concept of the tragedy of the commons. As people get outdoors, they're not necessarily bearing the negative consequences of their actions. And so we're seeing some of those negative consequences related to natural resource impacts, crowding and congestion, which are harming visitor experiences. And so in order to kind of address this issue, we asked in our surveys, both residents and providers, questions about crowding, natural resource impacts, and management techniques that can address these issues. And so we have a few interesting findings on the issue of crowding. It's reported by residents to be more of an issue outside community than inside community. So folks are feeling the crowding, the congestion more so in those dispersed remote areas where maybe they're not expecting to see anybody as compared to maybe their local parks or playgrounds. And the typical method of coping with the crowding is to find new places to recreate. So people are already changing their behaviors because of crowding. Another issue is that human-caused natural resource impacts tend to be ranked as the largest concerns. Things like trash and fire risk are ranked very high, which means those are issues we want to address. But interestingly, those concerns are shared by both residents and providers, kind of providing some unanimity to the need to address those. Now, the objective with this report is to identify how land managers can approach this issue to support the long-term well-being of outdoor recreation in Oregon, thereby sustaining those benefits, having that balanced approach. And so our report provides recommendations based on what residents tell us they want, what providers tell us they need, and it's supplemented with field perspectives from folks who institute some of these different techniques. And so there's recommendations on managing visitation levels, providing information on crowding and natural resource impacts, and adapting current infrastructure. And again, the goal here is that we want to balance outdoor recreation conservation so that the places that people love to go to now, they're going to continue to love for years to come. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Grady Callahan to talk about our next statewide issue.
Thanks, Caleb. So our last statewide issue is dealing with recreation data standards. Our SCORP process has traditionally done a recreation inventory aggregated to the county level, but for the 2019 SCORP, we developed a parkland mapping tool, and we focused the inventory within urban growth boundaries. And what we found was that there was a lack of data standardization and centralization of recreation data in the state, which ended up creating a barrier both for planning and resource management. So for this SCORP, we chose to focus our efforts on developing a statewide GIS data standard for recreation facilities by working with Oregon's geospatial data community and the existing governance structure. Our intent is that buy-in and acceptance by the GIS data community will help to ultimately increase the availability and accessibility of consistent recreation facility data, which would also result in more uses of that for things like emergency response and health tracking. Next slide. So our process involved establishing a recreation data work group in the spring of 2022. And that included participation by multiple state and local government agencies, as well as dialogue and input from our federal partners, specifically at the Forest Service and the BLM. Our work group developed a draft recreation data standard in 2023, and that made its way through Oregon's governance process for adopting GIS standards, with a final review and acceptance, yay, in April of 2024, so just a couple months ago. So what we've done since then is updated the parkland mapping data from our previous SCORP into this new standard, and we'll be sharing that through the state's GIS clearinghouse and making that available to everyone in the state. So I'm really excited about this because adopting this statewide standard is a big step forward to improving the quantity and accessibility of recreation facility information, both in the near future, as well as supporting future SCORP inventory efforts.
Thank you, Brady. So our last SCORP component that we're going to cover today is the Land and Water Conservation Fund Open Project Selection Process Review and Scoring. Now, this is a really important part of SCORP because this is really where we bring it all together. This is the OPSP, as it's referred to, is the outline of the objective criteria and standards for grant selection in the Land and Water Conservation Fund program. And the criteria are based upon the priority needs that we've identified in SCORP. So this is really where we connect all of this research we've done in SCORP into allocating these funds to make sure that projects that receive those funds address the needs that Oregonians have expressed. And so I really want to stress here, this criteria is based upon input from both Oregon residents and recreation providers. Now, this is an overview of the criteria. So the first piece, the technical review, is kind of a pass-fail, making sure that applicants have all of their documents. But then we have the SCORP criteria, which makes up 85 of the possible 125 points for grant applications. And then we have community support criteria financial commitment criteria, sustainability criteria, readiness to proceed criteria, and discretionary committee criteria. So these items 3 through 7 are not updated through the SCORP process. They're the same criteria as exist in the current OPSP. Now, I do have a little bit of a breakdown here for how the SCORP 85 points are separated out across different sub-criteria. And some of these are actually very similar to what's in place right now, and they're updated based on if residents and providers have changed their survey responses. And then other pieces of these criteria are updated based upon the statewide issues that we looked at in this plan. And hopefully it's clear as I go through here how you can see how the different topics we've covered today feed into this grant criteria. So of those 85 points, there's 25 points for local needs and benefits, 20 points for statewide priorities, 10 points for underserved community priorities, 10 points for universal design and inclusive outdoor recreation opportunities. And then there's 5 points each for accessibility accommodations, balancing conservation and recreation priorities, physical activity benefit priorities, and the need for major rehabilitation. And so I will say this one last piece about this criteria. This is really where we make sure that these real world projects are addressing the issues and needs that we've identified through this planning process and that were ultimately specified by both Oregon residents and providers. Now, the next steps in the SCORP process, upon receiving approval from the commission, we'll be submitting a final draft to the governor because we need to receive an approval letter from the governor and have that accompany the final plan when we send it to the U.S. National Park Service for adoption. And this should be happening in the next couple of months. And then if everything goes along the timeline that we currently have, this upcoming plan will be in place from the beginning of 2025 through the end of 2029. And so I think that covers everything that we wanted to present today. And I believe we have time for some questions and comments.
All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments? That was very thorough. Thank you, guys. I can't see anybody on the screen. It might be on my end, but if you do, just go ahead and speak up if you have a question. Oh, there we go. No questions? I guess one question I had was the role of like outdoor recreational sports, like volleyball, tennis, basketball, soccer. Did any of that come up in your review and some of the discussions that you guys had?
Yeah, we include those types of activities in our in the survey on our question about participation. So we do have various court sports, and not just court sports. We have soccer fields, a lot of what you think of as like a local parks and rec with, you know, baseball field, basketball courts. So we do have that in there. In some cases, we kind of combine activities because, you know, if we broke court sports out into everything, then our 76 activities turn into 200, 300, right? And so sometimes we combine like activities. And then what we're able to do is take that participation data, and then that can then feed into some of the work Randy's done, looking at health benefits that come from that participation, looking at the economic benefits that come from that participation as well.
Awesome. That's helpful information. Anybody else?
Maybe I'll chime in and just ask, the report that goes forward to the governor and to the Park Service, does it include all of the, does it show all the different ways that you've quantified all these variables, or is that just a summary report that goes forward? And for those of us who are nerdy enough to want to see that kind of quantification, where would we go to see that?
So there's kind of a couple different ways I would that we present the information. So we have kind of the main plan document, which has a lot of the numbers. I mean, it is, I think, close to 300 pages long, but in some of the cases, even with it being 300 pages long, we still have to summarize. So for instance, the survey that Lydia worked on, that survey itself has a document that has, I think, about 200 pages worth of results. And so we publish everything, and we technically have to send the National Park Service a hard copy. So the hard copy is the main report, but we online, we publish all of our documentation. So all of the technical reports that go into it. So Professor Rosenberger has a number of technical reports, in addition to summary chapters in the main SCORP plan. And it is, like I said, all published.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and then Caleb, also want to add to that, Doug, that in addition to the methodology, we do on some of these then have appendices that break out by county so that we can get a little more spatial resolution on the activity information.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
All right.
Madam
See-
Chair, I guess I have a comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Grasty.
So, as I've watched these over the last few years, and I gotta admit, I haven't spent as much time as I should have reading the materials that we have available to us today. Every time I think, well, it doesn't feel like it fits Eastern Oregon. And I don't know how to improve on that. I know you guys work your tail off. And I'm also really focused on looking at JR and the picture that's behind him and thinking we just lost 1 million acres out here. And outdoor recreation is going to change because of it. And I don't see a reflection of much of the standard that comes along with lots of Eastern Oregon reflected in this. And I don't want to take away any of the work that you guys have done. This is amazing, and it's put together with an agenda in many ways for the land conservation funding. But again, I think we're missing something. And the only solution I have to offer for the commission is I wish we'd take this whole thing over the next year and take all the pieces that we heard today and take them on one at a time and really drill down into them and let the commission members understand it as well as maybe that's an act, these that are too small to show up in here, but they're everything in many ways in many of these communities. And I guess I always question when we think about an outdoor activity, when you get to rural, that's just the thing you do. It's just part of life. And I don't know how we measure that. I don't know the importance of it in statewide planning, but it's pretty important at a community level. At any rate, I want to commend the work you've done, but something is missing in it for me. In the last two SCORPs, I felt that way pretty strongly, and in some of the ones in the past before, it just feels like it doesn't fit everything in the state.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, because we have heard through our advisory committee some similar sentiment, and we've done a few things to try to address it without. So one issue we run into is the simple numbers issue with surveys. So with the resident survey, we don't have enough resources to break out the survey by county, so we can distinguish survey responses and report it up to urban, rural, suburban. And so we do have that, but it's rural. It's not, it could be rural any part of the state. It's not distinguished whether it's eastern, western, anywhere. And so we did make one adjustment where we included rural priorities specifically in the grant criteria. In one of the, I think it was underserved, because the overall times per year was lower for rural residents. And so we incorporated that. And then the one area we can get more specific location wise is with our provider survey, because we do have providers from across the state. And so we do have some county specific responses for providers as well. But I think that you bring up a great point overall, and it's something that I have in my notes for, kind of issues to address in the next SCORP.
Yeah, and I'd also like to contribute to that. Thank you, Commissioner Grasty, for that information. Yeah, the SCORPs, because of the scale, do leave some of the detailed information on the wayside, but there are opportunities to drill down a little bit more into the data by looking at specific areas. These data will be publicly available. We've had a lot of our partner consulting companies have accessed the information when they've been working on local scales to look at what's going on or what the trends are there. I've gone in when people have asked how things rank or what's going on in a certain location, and I've been able to provide them with some of that information. So I think maybe one of the shortcomings here is that we do this big 5-year SCORP, but we don't do in the interim do the drill downs, because that's not something that's typically funded or an expressed interest out of an individual coming forward and saying, hey, could I access some of the data, or could you look at X, Y, or Z? So we do have opportunities beyond what we deliver in this report, but I don't know that we've tapped into those as fully as we should and could in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Grasty, for those comments too. Any other thoughts? Okay, I would entertain a motion. This is something that we need to take action on. So entertain a motion to approve the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan draft.
I'll move approval or acceptance. Is that the word you want?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Berger. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Dewar with the second. Are there any other thoughts or comments before we take a vote on this? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of approval of the SCORP, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Any abstentions? Seeing none, it's so passed. Thank you all for the work that you put into this. And, I certainly hear what Commissioner Grasty is saying and see it reflected in Southern Oregon as well, too. And a lot of communities that are surrounded by so much outdoor space to begin with. So, look forward to having further discussions as we move through this SCORP and into the next phase about how we can make sure it's a little bit more equitable for other regions of our state. But thank you all. This is really helpful. All right, moving on. We have the budget. Courtney, is that? Okay, there you are.
Here I am. All right, I'm gonna pull up my screen real quick. And then start presenting. There we are. Okay. And then let me move you guys. All right. Can everyone see that? Good. All right, Chair Hill and Director Sumption, commission members, for the record, I'm Courtney Zarazef, lead budget analyst for Oregon Parks and Rec. Today, I'm here for agenda item 1D. This is an action item for your approval. And before I start, thank you all so much for your time and patience as we work through the budget, and thank you for coming together to look through this today. The agenda that I have for today is to review what we've put together for the agency review budget, or agency request budget, I'm sorry. We're going to go through the beginning balance, revenues, expenditures, get to the ending balance. We're going to talk about some reservations that we have, cash reservations, I should say, and POPs at the end. If you've reviewed before, you'll also see that with this, we're facing some current and upcoming challenges. And so we're going to talk about what those are, and then also what we're working on for solutions and kind of the next steps that I'm sure you'll hear about, and we'll have some great discussion about maybe now and in the future. And then the action items for us to go over are to approve our ARB today, which includes the CSL and the POPs. So I know we have some new commission members, so I just wanted to go over first what a beginning balance is. Where do we even start at the beginning of the biennium? And what we do, what that entails, is we look up what was the actual beginning balance for our current biennium. We project what it's going to be, but then we have 6 months from the end of the last biennium to get some journal entries in and to kind of shore it up, cross our T's, dot our I's, make sure it's right. And then we have our actual beginning balance. So we start with that, and then we take out what we projected to expend, our limitation that was passed by the legislature. And then we either add or subtract some adjustments in revenue for the current biennium. This biennium we added because lottery went up, so we added some revenue for that. And then we subtract our long session, anything that came out of the long session in February, and any e-board. So that includes the salary pot that went through with all the COLAs, and it includes the land acquisition that just went through an e-board. We will also add, we don't usually have wildfire recovery money, but this time we did. So we added some wildfire recovery money. Just to note, that was money that was from the 2020 wildfire. So it often takes 4 years to be able to see it again, but that was added in. And then we also added in our grant carryover. So the grant carryover, I highlighted it or kind of bolded it there just to know that this is money that has already been obligated out to grant recipients, but won't be given out until the next biennium. So it's already required, or we've already said that we're going to give it out, but it's still cash on hand. It's just reserved for grant recipients. And then we subtract any reservations that we want to keep for the current biennium. So with that, I've also included where we've been for the last handful of biennium. Right here is where we projected to be for our beginning balance for all of these biennium, including next biennium, 25-27, and then where we actually ended up once everything was said and done. Usually our actuals end up higher. Usually that's because we don't end up spending our entire limitation. Some of this is in negatives. I wasn't here for this, but I suspect this is because for grants, we gave out more. We ended up giving out more than we thought we were going to give out. So from there, we go to revenues. I also tried to include a few past bienniums just so we could compare, and you guys can kind of see where we may be used to being and where our trend is going. I broke these down based on funds. So we have our lottery funds, and then other funds are broken out into a handful of different areas that's below until the federal funds. So we have park user fees. That's the biggest piece of other fund revenue. The other revenue that you see is a combination of interest income, sales, non-business license fees, and then some trust and dedicated accounts. And then you'll see federal and general. I included on this one 2 versions. So the version 1 that you see right here, I included this just because I wanted to kind of lay out, if we did nothing, if we are where we are now, this is how the revenue would break down. After we went through this and did this and realized we need some more revenue, and I'll go through that in a little bit, we increased our park user fees, and right now this is where we stand with those current changes. So I'll go through that soon, but I just wanted to kind of point out and break down the difference of these two and where we are now, which is this last column. All right, so for lottery funds, I know there were some questions last time about what our operational lottery funds is, so I wanted to have a slide to show that as well. So this is the breakdown of where our lottery funds end up. So we have 25% now goes to local government grants, so that's this 36%. And that is 25% of the Measure 76 amount. That 25% does not include this debt service, that is separate. This preventative maintenance, it's a little over 500,000, almost 600,000. That's an internal decision that we make to put in a preventative maintenance dedicated account, which means that the rest of this 109 is specifically for our operational needs. In that, I just kind of want to point out here, this is a big number, and part of this big number, I'm sure there was a lot of discussion about this over the past year, and maybe prior, but this big number is because this biennium's 27%, this current 25%, I'm sorry, and because we hit the threshold for lottery funds for Measure 76 to meet that 25%, in our LAB budget, or in LAB, our LFO had decided to take that additional percentage of the year prior as well, that additional 13%, which is why it is inflated, or it is increased substantially more. So you'll see some slides how that kind of messes with some trends in future slides, but I just wanted to point out that's why that one is so high, and then it dips back down. In the coming biennia, we will see it increase steadily again. We likely won't see a big number like this. We'll see it increase at the same rate as our operational funds is increasing, since they're coming out at the same pot, hopefully increasing, crossing fingers. And so here too, you'll see this 8%. Part of the reason it is lower is just our overall lottery funds has not increased as much as we would have liked to hope. It is increasing, but we would like to see it closer to maybe that 11 or 12%. Okay, and then other funds. I did the same breakdown for this. So we have some dedicated accounts. Yeah, Commissioner Berger.
Yeah. The percent increase
This one?
up here,
Yep.
that's actual, not budget. In other words, yeah, these percentages increase in lottery fund are actuals, not budgets numbers. Is that correct?
Well, it's from our LAB. So they're all from budgets, but all of these, I guess that's a good point also, in that these come from, this is legislative approved budget, so at the end, and then this is where we currently are. So all of them are based off that current budget, or where that budget was. It's not based off actual. I do think it would be close.
So this 8%.
Yes. This 8% is where we project our 25-27 lottery funds to be throughout the entire 25-27 biennium.
Because Vicki, keep in mind, we still have 2 forecasts to go. See, these are based on the forecasts we currently have and the projections that are there.
I guess my point is this. When we were back in this year, were we using 8% as a projection, or 13% as a projection? Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. I can clarify that. This isn't my projection. This is based off a lottery funds projection that the state overall, that we are provided from the lottery group.
Exactly. Thank you. I just, because what happens here, it really affects here, and I don't like projection-based budget
Yeah,
at all.
yeah,
So who's making us
that's fair.
put that 8% in there is the question.
Yeah. So I came up with, like, I calculated that 8% based off the numbers that we were given for the lottery projection. So that isn't a amount that they give us to project our funds off of. It's based
Right.
off the actual numbers that were given, and then I calculated the percentage increase.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So similarly with other funds, we see the overall altogether up top where other funds are looking. I'm going to kind of address this in a second, but the overall breakdown is operational funds, dedicated, which is preventative maintenance. And again, that's similar. We take 3.5% of our overnight fees, and that is internally what we decided for preventative maintenance. It's not in a statute or anything that is mandated. The RV and ATV are specifically dedicated. And then this Main Street, I just want to point out, we expect we're going to get this amount. We just can't include it yet because that gets decided by the legislature in the long session. So likely this will be 140 million, but I can't put it in quite yet. So once that is put in, I expect that this percentage won't be negative anymore, and it'll be closer to 6% increase. So we're seeing an 8% and a 6% once that gets put in overall. And then I also wanted to make sure, I know it is sometimes confusing to look at it separately like that. So I wanted to just make sure to highlight our overall operational funds, where we're at with all the other things taken out. So with the lottery, I included the preventative maintenance here. I combined them together because I think you can make the argument that preventative maintenance is operational. And since it's an internal decision, we have some flexibility with that. So we have our overall lottery funds here and the other funds here, and similarly, all the same things, the percentage increase. We see the operational totals right here. We're seeing the big dip in this current biennium because of that extra 13% that was taken out. So we're seeing what looks like a really high percentage in this biennium, but it's not actually that percentage because it was that 13% was taken out of twice. So it looks like we increased a lot, but really this current biennium was such a big dip for our operational funds that it just makes this look extra high. So really, if you kind of put that extra 17% or 17 million that was taken out of this current biennium, really we're looking at for lottery funds an 8% increase and a 4.8% increase total down here, 8% up here and 4.8% total. So again, this is a lot of what we're seeing, how much that affected our operational revenue and the kind of the revenue that we have to play with and to use within the biennium. And then we have, I wanted to go over just kind of the breakdown of park user fees. So in park user fees, we hear that term a lot, but there's three things that make up park user fees: day use rates, which is the $5 parking fee, overnight, which is the 80%, or overnight, which makes up 80% of all park user fees. That includes things like tents, RVs, yurts and cabins, and then reservations. So the big piece here is the overnight fees. So over here on the right, I included what that is. Right here, this first column is our current, what we're approved to be able to charge within those ranges. And this second column is currently the range we're charging within. So we charge higher in the summers and less in the winter, less busy months. But these are kind of the overall rates. You can kind of see where we fall within the approved rates. I'm going to go over this more in detail in a little bit, but after we kind of went through all of our expenditures, we decided to increase the fees $2 for anything not specified above. So we have some very minor things that is kind of negligible in the grand scheme of things, but things like a room rental, anything like that, we increased $2. Tents, if we were able to, we increased $3, but you can kind of see that we were already at $21 here for summer months, so we were only able to increase it $1. So where applicable, we increased it $3. RVs were increased $4 and $5 for yurts and cabins. So over here on the far end, you can see where with this increase, where the ranges would go to. And you can see for tents, we're already at the cap of the current approved range. But things like RVs, we are $3 away from the highest amount that we're within the approved range for. And you can see within the yurts and cabins, we still have quite a bit of room before the top of the range. So that, I'm going to go to expenditures next, but I just want to kind of, while we're at revenues, does anybody have any questions? I just went through a lot. Oh, okay. All right, on to expenditures. So right here, the main piece that we're kind of looking at and looking for trends at is this overall CSL. I'm sure you guys are aware, we don't have a lot of say in these expenditures and how they're put together. We have our base budget, which is our current budget minus one-time pops that were put in last biennium. We have inflation added in, we have personal services inflation added in, but we don't, it's nothing other than what we are kind of expected to spend at the base level. This time they also put the 13% for local government grant in with our current service level, so that's added in over here. So we can see we're going from 267 to 340. I mean, we have our local government grant put in there, so again, that's kind of artificially high in comparison to the last one, but still the trend is we're higher, our expenditures are quite a bit higher than this time this current biennium. The other thing to point out is POPs here. We have 51 million last biennium for POPs, 30.3 that included 2 of those 13% went for local government grant last time. So last biennium, our CFO and LFO had us put it in down here instead of up here. And then the grant carryover last biennium was 13.2. You can see that went up quite a bit this biennium. Almost all of that is from local government grant. Not almost all, but a very big chunk of that is from local government grant that's carried over. So I did also want to provide this alternate breakdown because I think this sometimes is not misleading, but just incomplete. In that we are looking here, this was 94.5 total. And an alternative breakdown I just wanted to show is 33.3% of that was continuous. So a lot of that, I'm going to go to personal services after this, but a lot of that was people, but some of it was just operational costs that needed to happen, but it does go over and continue into this upcoming biennium and biennium going forward. And then the breakdown also for the 25-27 POPs, I'm going to go into what those POPs are, but only we don't have a lot this time intentionally, but 2.9 million of that is continuous, and the rest is that one-time grant carryover. Next is personal services. I just wanted to make sure to touch on. So personal services hit us pretty hard this time. A lot of it was because of the COLAs, but just inflationary costs that went up and extra FTEs and positions. So right here in the POPs that we had this current biennium, we added 8 total positions, but we added 38.25 FTEs. So when we add COLAs to that, when we add benefits to that, a lot of that influences how much that 15% has gone up for the next biennium. The COLA total for this biennium that we were given for salary pot was 10.8 million, or almost 10.9 million. So a fairly substantial. And then here we have just kind of a general, kind of an overview of all of those combined. So where we are for revenues and our total expenditures for this biennium. Where I want to focus on is this ending balance right here. So you can see we are kind of, our ending balance right now is less than it was 2 bienniums ago. And one of the things I wanted to make sure to point out is I know that that 72 million sounds like a lot, and it is, but a lot of, and it goes quickly. And so I wanted to make sure we're keeping in mind 35.7 million of that is dedicated funds. It's not part of the operational costs that we have the flexibility to be able to use as needed. So that's within the local government grant, within RV, heritage programs, that's the OPMA, ATV, and then trust and dedicated programs. Also, we make sure to save 25 million for a runway so that we have it if needed. Hopefully we won't need it again, but it's there that if we need to be able to exercise it and have some flexibility with it. And then also from our calculations, our COLAs, we're not projecting them to be nearly as high as they were this time, but you know, we're taking a smaller percentage of a bigger pot. And so we're reserving 11.2 million for that. So all of that added together is 71.9, which with this reserve puts us in the black $87,000. So that's not a lot. And so that's why you can see kind of where the need for increasing the park user fees came from. And then also where a lot of our upcoming discussion will be for where do we go from here? We're able to kind of make ourselves whole this biennium, which I will say a lot of agencies are going through this. A lot of agencies are going through this. You know, they're going, everybody's personal services went up. So in no way are we standing alone, but we are able to keep ourselves whole this biennium, this upcoming biennium, which gives us some time to figure out what our 27-29 is going to look like. Before we kind of go into continuous, and then I'll also make sure we have time for any questions, but Lisa, do you have anything else to add here?
No, I just want to make sure everybody's keeping up with the acronyms. It's a lot.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have written that out.
I know Vicki knows them inside and out, but I just know like the new commissioners are probably like,
Yeah.
what's
I can go through this real quick. This is local government grant program. This is RV county opportunity. OPMA, I don't remember, but I just know it's part of heritage. And then we have ATV down here and trust and dedicated.
Thank you, Lisa. You were reading my mind. It'd be nice if there was a little glossary of them, not only spelling out, you know, what they mean,
but what they are,
what they actually are. Yes,
yeah.
That would be really nice.
Thank you. That's a good note. I can include that.
Well, because even those of us that know them, I mean, we have to start challenging ourselves, like on the trust and dedicated, how dedicated are they? Like what flexibility, what is their statute? So we're digging into that even internally. So, but it's really cool to see Courtney just confident running with it. So, right, Rebecca?
I know I've become one of those people. When I first started 10 months ago, I was like, wait, what? I don't know what that means. Yeah, Commissioner
Berger.
Can I comment on how minuscule 87057 is and how terrifying a number that is?
Yeah.
Just to say, well, Courtney, this is wonderful work. And to know this at this granular level is really important, but that's a terrifying number.
It's absolutely. absolutely frightening. And that's why you're having a special meeting and we didn't get our current service level entered in time because we were not confident. We knew the numbers were bad, but like Courtney had a number and our LFO analyst had a number and our CFO analyst had a number and none of them matched.
Yeah.
So
One
Courtney
thing
is
to keep in mind also is I'm with you that this needs to increase. But this 25 million is at the end of the biennium, it's included in our beginning balance. Because in theory, hopefully, we will not be using this 25 million. And so that is there in case we need it. And so once we see it in a beginning balance, that 25 million will be included in that. So we won't be seeing 87 at the very end.
Courtney, if I can, are you able to identify how much of that beginning fund balance is committed, obligated in some way?
It would be, let me think. Yes, I can pull it, give you an actual number when my screens are not done right after I'm done. Is that okay right after I'm done with this? That's a good question.
Yeah, sure it is. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so next step is just to go over what the current POPs are, which is a policy option package. And that is one of the action items to approve today. So the first one is the grant carryover. So those are amounts that have already been awarded out to grant recipients, and we're waiting on them to meet match or to meet requirements, and then we will send that out next biennium. So we have RV, RTP, ATVs, and Main Street and WCF. I'm just realizing how many acronyms I have on here. Land and water, and then you can see the local government grant right here is the biggest amount. And that is because we were able to award that whole amount out. I know that there was some concern at the beginning of the biennium that we wouldn't even be able to award that much that we were required to award, or the limitation, but we were able to award the whole amount. It will just be carried over to be able to send out next biennium. We also have a POP to increase our park user fee range, our fee for service range. So that range that we looked at before, it's increasing those ranges. It will not increase the fees with it. It will just increase our ability to be able to increase fees in the future. And then the third one is the reservation system, the online reservation system. All 2 million of that is going to a contract. And we've negotiated the contract to be 2 million every biennium, so $1 million a year in perpetuity going forward. And then the last one is to reestablish the phone center. And so that one is adding in 6 total positions. 3 of those positions are seasonal. So the amount of FTE that will be added is 4.5. So that continuous amount, I just want to make sure we keep in mind, is the 2.9 going forward into future biennium. Yeah, Commissioner Berger.
Yeah, continued park reservation system upgrade. This is a POP. So presumably the legislature could say we aren't paying for that. Is that true, Rebecca or Courtney or Lisa?
Yeah.
I'm seeing nods.
Yeah.
What do we do? Do we have a contingency for that since we're halfway down the road? And
I would hope, since we've been working with the CIO's office and in concert with all those things, that wouldn't happen, but they won't let you put it in your current service level budget because it's not part of your base. So you have to do it in some type of policy option package. So,
but you're pretty secure about that. I always worry about POPs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be a lot more concerned if we were a general fund agency than I am knowing that we have the ability and the reserve to do it. And it's a risk. And if it doesn't, we'll have to come up with what a plan B looks like, because we won't have anybody to take those phone calls to make reservations.
It would look really bad. I can see answering the phone, call your legislator and see if that works. If you want to make a park reservation, call your legislator to do that. Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get out the fax machines and the old rotary phones. We got this. We know how to do it.
All right, so overall, one of the things I wanted to make sure to show, not just this time, but also, going forward for future action items and approval, is that we're always keeping the next biennium in mind. So the next biennium in mind. So we've already gone over where we are with the 72 million in the current upcoming biennium, but I also just want to make sure, and please keep in mind, take this with a grain of salt, because anytime you're looking at projections even further out, they get a little bit more cloudy. And this is if our projections are accurate and kind of things stay as is, but we still project our revenues to go up. But you can see this beginning balance where, since our ending balance for 25-27 is lower, the beginning balance for the next biennium is even lower. So we're at 472 roughly, total expenditures 434. And so this amount is where I start to feel a little nervous, not a little nervous. I start to feel nervous. And so that's where a lot of our conversations for the upcoming biennium are going to be, how do we increase that 37 million? So I included this portion in the brief that was sent, but I'm just going to kind of read through like our overall where we are now. So historically, inflation following a recession is fairly common. While some of this may have been anticipated, OPRD is currently experiencing a perfect storm of confounding events. Operational lottery funds decrease, high inflation, continuous pops and added FTE, high COLAs, and park closures. Keeping with economic patterns following an inflationary phase, we expect to see a balancing out phase over the course of the 25-27 biennium. Lagging prices will increase to meet with inflationary costs nationwide. Inflation will likely continue, but at a slower rate until things are able to find a relative equilibrium. Currently, OPRD's biggest challenge is that revenues are not keeping up with experienced inflation. While we don't want to overcorrect and rely on park visitors to bear the brunt of strategic costs, we will need to strategically increase revenues in order to bring OPRD back to a sustainable budget. While it will be necessary to increase and or expand park user fees, we would like to do so in a thoughtful pattern so we continue to stay in line with OPRD's mission and purpose to keep parks accessible. And while accessibility will remain the North Star, this comes with a financial cost: maintenance, bathrooms, maintaining service level, expanding to meet current need and desire, and improving facilities and access to facilities like Caleb had talked about, and making sure things are accessible for everybody is financially, there's a cost to it. So our next steps will include collecting and analyzing all of our options for increasing revenues and other programs, evaluating other programs, and including them in a 27-29 forecast. So, and just some things to note before I really kind of dive into this. We can only control what we can control. While we would keep tabs on the lottery funds, we can't control how it will grow or what it will do, other than everybody on this call going out and buying lottery tickets. But other funds is the only avenue within our control. So decreasing overall costs is also an option, although any decrease to our budget will be a permanent decrease. So it will also go forward into the next biennium. So it's a commitment, and it really should be done once we've assessed our other options or all of our options have stalled. The other thing to keep in mind is there is excess demand and usage levels that we haven't seen before, and it seemingly is holding steady post-pandemic. So we knew post-pandemic people were inside and finally we're able to go out, and we saw a big surge. A lot of people are still going. We're still seeing peak amounts coming to a lot of our parks. So, and also of note, some parks have been closed, and for our while we've been improving them. And so some of the revenues, it hasn't been super significant, but some of the revenue streams have stagnated and when those parks reopen and revenue streams will flow again. And some of those have additional camps and sites that will hopefully increase some of that revenue also and decrease the line that's been waiting for that. So with all that kind of in mind, I talked about the increase in fees that we have for as soon as possible. So that's coming up as soon as we're able to do it. So that $2, $3, $4, and $5. We're increasing the fee range to give us the ability to be able to increase fees in the future. And then we're going to continue to analyze and look over all of our revenue streams. And some of that looks like assessing our infrastructure and inventory that we have, maybe look into offloading some property that we're not currently using or that is costing us. And then assessing and kind of looking into our day use rate. And then also one of the things we're looking is continue to evolve our forecast. A lot of our forecasts are really good. They've evolved already quite a bit over the decades and over the biennium, but also making sure that when we're doing forecasts like this and when we're looking at POPs, we're always looking 1 to 3 bienniums out to make sure that we're staying as sustainable as we're able to do, even though we know looking further out gets hazy. And then assessing capacities and a whole bunch of different scenarios. What could our options be, and trying to get creative with what that might look like or what our options could be. The other thing we've done is there's awareness of a need to kind of be prudent with our spending. We know we're okay this biennium. We know we're going to be okay for the upcoming biennium, but just making sure that our managers know that if there is extra fluff out there, if there's extra room in projects to not spend, just an awareness to know that anything we hold will increase our beginning balance next biennium, and same thing when we're in the upcoming biennium. That was a lot that I went over. So before we have the action items, but I just want to make sure, does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions, thoughts?
I had a question regarding, it was way back in the early part of it. And I want to make sure I understood that. And that was the preventive maintenance. Was that, did I understand that right? That number was about $500,000?
So there's 2 accounts of preventative maintenance we take from lottery funds. It's a little over 500,000. So that's that 0.6. That is an amount that we decide on that carries over every year. If it's not used, it's put back in the operational pot. And then this amount increases as our overnight fees. As the revenue increases for that, it's 3.5% of the overnight.
Okay. So Lisa, how's that preventive, that pot used, that 500,000? Do you know?
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, so we use that funding in each of the regions for preventative maintenance, and it's doled out based on maintenance management points across the state. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the maintenance management system, but it basically assigns a point value to the hours it would take to maintain a park at a certain level, and then the money is doled out accordingly. So parks that have a higher maintenance value, that take more to maintain, they have more buildings, more turf, more parking lots, all of those kinds of things, they get more money, obviously, to help kind of support that infrastructure. Does that help?
Yeah, kind of, it does.
And to add to that, Joel, just in addition to the preventative maintenance and that MMP piece of that, we also have our FIP, which is the facility investment program. And so that's a much more significant number. And then each of the regions and district get their own budget, and they're doing preventative maintenance projects in addition to those. That's just a dedicated amount that we hold from the beginning of the budget.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Matt, Dennis, feel free to weigh in more, but that's my
Yeah,
nerdy-
no, that's
nerdy brain.
exactly right. Oh, go ahead, JR.
Several $1 million. That's just the portion out of lottery funds. The fund across the agency is is several $1,000,000 and then broken up. I think most of our units get somewhere probably a low end of about 70,000 to a high end of a couple 100,000 per biennium for preventive maintenance projects. And we would just call that like their small budget fund, their small project budget. And so they have a minor preventive maintenance, which is like $0 to $20,000 projects, and then kind of a major preventive maintenance, which is projects that go up to 75,000. So it's kind of their maintenance projects that don't qualify for FIP level, but that they still need to do and aren't in their just normal program budget. So it's just kind of their own kind of park level project fund for projects up to about 75,000.
And on that other slide you had up there, Courtney, it had the 7.7 million. So that's more realistic, not the 600,000. That's just that minor.
Is that something that's new, this 500,000 pot, or has this been going on?
No, it's one of those that we're actually kind of challenging ourselves on it because we made up that number. And honestly, I believe it came up from the 1999 audit, where we had a backlog of maintenance, a list of projects that needed to be done. And anybody who has projects at home know that those projects evolve depending on what happens. And so it's probably time to look at that a little bit differently than where we've been. So we'll have to revisit that, but the logic has been there for decades.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was pleased to find out it's not statutorily required that we did it to ourselves, so we have the ability to fix it.
This is one of those things, I think, Lisa, that if we've been doing it since 99 and it's working, we'll continue to do it until it's a disaster. So I think maybe a review of this, Joel has a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's just,
You're just rolling along, you don't make changes.
Yeah. Is it the right amount?
Fall over a cliff and you say, hey, why didn't I think of that earlier? So
Yeah.
I think this is worth a look. Joel's
Yeah.
right.
Sorry, I'll chime in because I just pulled up our budget for this biennium. This by 23-25, it's about $6 million.
Yeah.
About $1.5 million is the major fund, which is the ones up to 75,000, and about $4.5 million is the minor fund. Obviously, the minor fund projects of up to 25,000, there's tons of those. That's like re-roofing buildings, redoing decks. So about $4.5 million gets split between the three regions based on their MMP points that Matt mentioned, and then another $1.5 million in the major fund.
A lot of that minor and major preventive maintenance money is going towards our ADA upgrades too, so that we're becoming a little more compliant to the goals. And so we're still behind in that, and we could always use more, but we're trying to be as diligent as we can as we try to fix things to keep campers safe, as well as meet the obligations with the ADA plan.
I'm sitting here like an idiot trying to remember what ARB stands for.
Agency request budget.
Agency request budget.
That makes me smile, Vicky.
I know what it is, but I can't remember what that stands for.
Well, because they changed it all the time. It's not, yeah.
There was, before I forget, right now what we're projecting, this is not including the grant carryover, but the question about how much of this beginning balance is dedicated. We're projecting about $50 million, 49.5 left over. It's not including that grant carryover, but that's the amount that we're projecting to be within specifically dedicated funds. So within that local government grant, Main Street, ATV, those funds.
Yeah, and to Vicky's point, for your new commissioners, this is the agency request budget, and then it'll go over and it'll become the governor's recommended budget with some kind of modification, and then it'll go through the legislative process and it'll become the legislatively adopted. So what you're seeing today probably won't look like what you see in the end, but this is where you get to weigh in and at least get the base where you want it.
Perfect.
Well, to get things started, I'll move approval of the agency request budget. And thank you very much, Courtney, for this very granular work of getting this, drilling down on these numbers. These are incredible numbers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'll
Good
second
job.
that.
Do we need to approve the policy option package as well as the budget?
That you'll approve the entire budget with the policy option packages that are there.
Can I make that motion?
Yes, please do.
Okay, then I'll move approval of the agency request budget with policy packages. And I forget what else was in there.
That's it. Policy option package, you got it.
Okay, the policy.
Thank you, Commissioner Berger. Do I have a second?
I'll resecond that.
Awesome. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, the policy package and the agency requested budget are approved. Thank you so much. That was super thorough, Courtney.
Great. Thank you all.
And you're gonna send a glossary, right?
I can for sure. I can add that in if that would be helpful.
Yeah, all the
Yes.
acronyms, that would be really
Yeah.
nice.
I will
Thank
It was
you.
only a couple months ago, Courtney was even asking what they are, so you have no idea.
I mean,
how
to be
cool it is.
fair, I still sometimes ask.
Joel, the problem with that glossary is, God forbid you try and use it with a different state agency because it won't work.
Oh, great. Thanks for the heads up.
Nice work, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we're moving to item number 1E, open rulemaking to restrict Ocean Shore Beach camping in Brookings, which I think is Katie, is that right?
Yes. I will share my screen.
Oh, beautiful. Great.
You can. Oh, here. I'm gonna stop it and get the right screen. Okay. Can you all see the presentation? Okay, so Chair Hill, Director Assumption, Katie Gauthier here with item 1E, request to open rulemaking to prohibit camping along the ocean shore in Brookings. We received a petition from a group of the Macklin Cove Condominium Association in Brookings to initiate rulemaking for OAR 736-0300020 to add Brookings to the list of cities where overnight camping is prohibited within the city limits. For this agenda item, we did receive 32 public comments that were in support of opening rulemaking and in support of adding Brookings to the list of cities. The petitioners cite public health concerns, risk to public safety, and impacts on the marine ecosystems as reasons for closure. The petitioners own property above Mill Beach in Brookings, and in your packet, there's the copy of the petition that they submitted. Our legal counsel says that it meets the requirements under the ORS 183-390. So that's why we're bringing it to you for a request to open rulemaking. Currently in rule, we prohibit camping along the ocean shore in 8 cities and 2 counties, and it's also prohibited along the boundaries of state parks along the ocean shore. So on the map here, you can see if we were to add Brookings, it would be this red line along the city limits of Brookings. It is already prohibited along the Harris Beach boundaries. So that's where we would add it. And we would just add the word Brookings. If you open rulemaking, we'll open public comment beginning September 1st. We'll do a public hearing in Brookings, and then we would bring it back to you for adoption, consideration of adoption with all of the public comments in either fall or winter, at your fall or winter meeting. Any questions or additional information I can provide?
I have one. So do we really have an option here on whether to open rulemaking or not?
You could choose not to, and then we would have to hold a public hearing in Brookings to talk about, to take feedback about why we weren't opening rulemaking. And Attorney General Shipsey could correct me if I'm not describing that option correctly, but we do have the option to explain why we would not open rulemaking.
Yeah, when we receive a petition for rulemaking, we have 90 days to respond. One of the options is to deny it. In doing so, we would have to take public comment on the impacts of that denial. And, there are about 6 criterion we'd have to address in denying, but one response to a petition for rulemaking is the one you have before you, which is to open rulemaking and go through the process to decide if the petition is one we want to accept. We can also modify the petition. Your final action isn't dictated by the petition itself. It's just that we would open rulemaking and go through the rulemaking process.
So at the end of the day, I think we're going to have to open rulemaking and go through this, but forgive me today for being Mr. Negative, but all we're doing is shoving a problem down the beach or shoving it into the rest of rural Oregon. And this is a state problem. This isn't a Brookings problem. I just hate to see us get into the position where we're the only ones addressing, this state agency is the only one addressing homelessness. That's all this is about. And it just seems wrong to put us into this boat or let ourselves get into it without the state being way more active than they apparently are or aren't, as the case would be. Anyway, there's my rant, my second rant for the day.
Let me rant a minute here, Steve. We are the state. And we are in the process by opening these rulemaking is probably solving a problem for a certain population of Brookings. What we are not doing is helping the underserved community that we say we help. I don't know if letting them camp out on this beach is serving them either. I'm going to approve this, but I think we are all just appalled that in our country and in our state that this issue just keeps going on and on. Certainly the petitioners are not underserved and are going through the appropriate process to clean up a problem for them. But you're right, it doesn't make the problem go away and it doesn't solve the larger problem in any way, shape, or form.
The one opportunity with opening rulemaking is that there will be an opportunity for a community conversation. Brookings has, over the last 20 years, considered making this request, and they haven't. They've gone back and forth in deciding whether or not to open rulemaking, and we haven't had a conversation. This will allow us to have the opportunity to have a public hearing, to take public comment, and really hear what the people of Brookings want, and determine, is this where they want people to camp? Is there a different location? And you get to decide what the people based on what you hear from the people of Brookings.
Right. And Katie, just to confirm, we have not received any public comment of any kind that would cause us to reconsider opening rulemaking. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we have not opened the official public comment on the rulemaking. These were the comments we received were individuals who were commenting on the agenda item.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Katie. Any further comments? Okay. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion on this.
I will go ahead and move that we open rulemaking as
Thank
proposed.
you. Thank you, Commissioner Dewar. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Berger. Seeing no further conversation on this, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of opening rulemaking to add Brookings to the list of cities where camping on Ocean Shore is prohibited, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no.
I really want to vote no. I'm not gonna, but as I said, I agree with everything Vicky said, but boy, this, we are not the solution to this. And I know we're one of the state agencies, but this is a tough one for me, but put me down as a yes.
You can abstain as well, I think, on this. Is that right? I think we have a quorum.
Yeah, we have more even with Vicky here, so you're
It's
free to
up to
vote how you
you.
feel.
How do you, let me know how you want to vote.
I want to vote no. When I drive through the city of Salem and see this problem, and then lands in our lap, it's not right.
Thank you. Definitely respect those comments, and Commissioner Berger's as well. So, all right. Seeing that we have enough votes, the request to open rulemaking does move forward, and thank you, Katie. On to agenda item 1F, amendment to Fort Stevens utility upgrade design contract with Matt.
Chair Hill, Director Sumption, members of the commission, good afternoon. Matt Rippey with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And before I jump into this, I just want to thank you again, similar to what Courtney said, just for making the time for this today. I know there'll be some project managers that are excited to hopefully get approvals on these and keep these projects moving forward. So thank you. Before I jump into the first agenda item, which is 1F, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. And I think I've talked about this a little bit over the last couple of years, and it's that we continue to see an increase of roughly 30 to 40% price increase on our contracts, whether that be for design, construction, those kinds of things. The three briefs that I have for you today are kind of no exception to that. Unfortunately, we continue to see those increases. The one thing I want to mention is that ultimately, there's only so much money for these projects, and as we increase what we are adding to some of these contracts, that does come at a cost to other projects in terms of reductions or total elimination. And so at our September commission meeting, what I'd like to do is bring back to you the original Go Bond project list, as well as the policy option package list, so we can kind of see what those changes have been over time, just to keep you up to speed. So again, item 1F is seeking approval for the amendment to a Fort Stevens utility upgrade design project. This would be an increase of $534,000, which would create a total new contract for $2.23 million. That's roughly a 30% increase. This design work includes the utility and site. I'm sorry, I'm going to share my screen now that I'm at this point. Sorry about that. Let me know when you can see that. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. So as you can see in the briefing, these improvements include the design work for the utility and site improvements in L, M, N, and O loops at Fort Stevens, as well as day use improvements around the Peter Iredale day use area, and then replacement of the C loop restroom with a new design, which I'll show in the next brief. But I just wanted to run through, again, this is in the brief that you have, just kind of shows the scope of work. So this is the C loop area where there will be restroom replacement. These are L, M, N, and O loops where the utility upgrades will take place, as well as site improvements, things like paving and extending some of the parking stands. And then this is the day use area that will have improvements primarily to in terms of their accessibility. Right now there's newer restrooms there. This project will add quite a bit of hardscape so that folks can navigate around those restrooms a little bit easier. This is the new site for the restroom in C loop. The piece I wanted to show you, again, I think is on the next slide, but we've got a new kind of standard design for restroom and shower buildings that we'll be using across the state. They're gender neutral. They just add a kind of a much higher level of service, I think. So with that, are there any questions?
Matt, I have a question.
Sure.
And this is kind of close to my heart as someone who owns an engineering firm and understands these costs. These are running amok these days. Have you got pretty good project oversight on these when someone comes back to you and tells you there's a 30% increase in the design phase of it? Are they quantifying those, or are they just throwing a 30% number out to you?
So the project managers, we have a series of construction project managers in the agency that kind of oversee these contracts, not only through design, but also through construction. And I have to say, they've gotten really good at pushing back. To your question, really going through these with a fine-tooth comb, understanding why those prices are going up, where they're going up, whether it's related to the, staffing or just, the services provided. The other thing that we've been doing more of is checking in with other agencies. I know we've had a lot of conversation with Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Forestry, Department of Administrative Services. They're seeing the exact same increases. So, part of that is just to make sure that folks aren't just targeting the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, but it's pretty standard across the board. In fact, I've heard even through some of the school bonds across the state that the same thing is happening really everywhere. So it's a great question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, man.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thanks, Joel, for that question. It's helpful insight with your background. Any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion on this.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Dewar. We have
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Condor. So we have a motion before us to approve to amend design contract for the Fort Stevens utility upgrade, not to exceed $2,230,000. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item 1G.
Thank
Silver
you.
Falls.
Chair Hill, Director Assumption, members of the commission. For the record, Matt Rippey with Oregon State Parks. I'm here with agenda item 1G, which is approval of construction for the demolition, actually, and construction of a restroom and shower building at Silver Falls State Park. And I'm going to share my screen quickly. This is a project that, again, you have approved previously for $1.3 million. As we went out to bid, the bids were coming back in and landed at $1.75 million. So this would be an increase of $450,000, which is roughly a 25% increase. As a reminder, this project consists of demolishing and building a new restroom at Silver Falls State Park. This is one of the policy option package projects, and I just wanted to quickly show you the design that I was talking about for the C-Loop, also at Fort Stevens. These are similar buildings, and so the way that these work is they're fully accessible. They're single stall showers on this side, and then restroom facilities on this side, and there's two, one on each side. Again, fully ADA compliant, that provide more of a family setting or folks that need assistance. So it's a shower and a restroom on each end of the building. So this would be the new facility up at Silver Falls. Currently, this is the building that was put in 1987. It's a little tired. It gets a fair amount of use up there, plus the weather. You can see here this utility area obviously needs upgrading and replacement. The restroom here, you can see the roof has leaked, even though it has a metal roof on it, just with the moisture that Silver Falls gets. It's hard to tell, and you'll be able to see a little bit more in the, I believe in the next briefing, but these shower and restroom stalls are not ADA compliant whatsoever. And so this will be a chance to kind of just entirely upgrade not only the interior of the building, but similar to what I showed in the Silver Falls building, all of the hardscape outside to make the paths compliant and accessible. Here's an example of what's at Silver Falls right now. Are there any questions on that one?
Is this just gonna be like the facility that I toured earlier this month at Honeyman? That the new shower and restroom there, I think it was on the D or the E loop.
Yes, it would be a very similar facility. That, again, we're trying to go to kind of a standard design so that we spend less on the actual building design costs. We still have to, you know, we still get charged obviously for the layout, depending on the site and those kinds of things, but we've tried to go to a more standard design that are fully accessible.
That was very nice. I was really impressed with that.
Good, thank you, thank you.
All right. Not hearing any further comments. I'll entertain a motion on approval of construction contract for Silver Falls for the restroom shower facility replacement. Let's see, not to exceed $1,750,000.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Grasty. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, who was that? Which one was that? I missed that. Commissioner Dorr, got it. Thank you. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Hearing none, the motion passes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay.
Oops. Moving on to agenda item 1H, which is the last piece on our agenda.
Yes, thank you. Chair Hill, Director Assumption, members of the commission, for the record, Matt Rippey with Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. I'm going to share my screen quickly. I'm here today seeking approval for the demolition and construction of a shower restroom facility at Milo McIver State Park. Similar to the previous two briefs, this was approved by the commission for an amount of $1.2 million back in February. Again, as bids have come in, the new bid amount was $1.75 million. This project, similar, almost identical to the last one at Silver Falls, consists of demolishing the existing restroom that was built in 1970 and replacing it with one of the new standard ADA compliant restroom and shower buildings. I will scroll down here just to give you a sense. Again, exact same design. I think these are pretty amazing facilities. We've had a lot of work go into those designs. I just wanted to show quickly some pictures of the existing. So you can see here, this is the existing 1970 building, several different layers and types of trail material there that will be replaced with a single type of material that's accessible. Again, this is the inside of the restroom side of the building. And one of the things I wanted to point out, similar to the Silver Falls facility, again, the shower stalls currently are not ADA compliant. Not only the width of the door for entry, but you can also see there's about a 4 to 5 inch lip to get from the dressing area into the shower stall. So these new ones won't have any of those kinds of barriers and will definitely provide a much better experience for really anybody that needs to use either the shower or the restroom facilities. Are there any questions on this one?
Being no questions, I will entertain a motion for approval of the construction contract for Milo McIver restroom shower facility replacement not to exceed $1,750,000.
We'll make that motion.
Commissioner Condor, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Wait a minute, is it Milo McIver or Dave Lucas?
Kyver.
Milo McIver.
Oh, okay, I've got the wrong paper in front of me. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think Commissioner Cribbins had a second there. So, All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Hearing none, so approved.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Ready for all those new restrooms.
Yeah.
I did shower at the Silver Falls one a couple months ago, and it is in desperate need of updating. So
Yeah.
I was
We'll get
also
there.
very desperate after doing a 20-mile hike, so I would take whatever I was given.
Good.
All right, so our next commission meeting, I think, is still on for September 17th through 18th. Is that right, Lisa, in Newport?
Yep, that's correct.
Awesome. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, input?
Just thank you all for making time for this special meeting. I know you had other things to be doing on a beautiful summer day, but we appreciate you making time to get these super important pieces handled. So thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. All right, meeting is adjourned. Thanks.